Hello, everyone. My name is Viet. I am currently a product manager at Facebook. Today, I'd love to share with you the path to become a PM and a PM your career from zero to one. Personally, I became a PM after having a chance to do a lot of explorations and soul searching during my MBA at University of Chicago booth, which landed my first PM job at Amazon a few years ago. Throughout this time, I have learned a lot from other PM leaders. I've also been involved in recruiting and mentorship for other PMs, for people who want to become PMs as well. So I figure this would be a timely one to have a webinar to share with you, what I've learned as well as some of the way and framework to think about transitioning to a PM career. So quickly on the agenda that what I'll share with you today, just a brief intro about me, then we want to jump into some of the key takeaways that I'd love for you to take after this presentation. We talk about why you need to preempt your career, and then how to build the skill set that help you launch the MVP or MLP version of a PM for yourself, as well as some transitional steps to get to the first PM role. And we'll end with some of the advice for new PMs, so people who have navigated through this process and now are in the first PM role and need to navigate through the next few years of the beginning of the PM path. So let's jump into it. So as I mentioned, I'm currently a product manager at Facebook, working on building products and systems for some of the data and analytics within the company in the core metrics space. Previously, I was a principal product manager at Amazon for the children's books business, as well as leading their growth for their ebook subscription called Kindle Unlimited, which is kind of the Netflix for ebooks there. Throughout my time at both of the companies, I think I've really been involved in different mentorship activities, also as well as understanding recruiting activities, as well as career development as well, to understand how this company thinks about career growth for PM within their company. And that's what I also want to share with you today, some of the framework that I think could be helpful, not just at this big tech company, but in general, how you can position yourself and build the skill set to land your first PM job. Key takeaways. So this is where I tell you what I'll be telling you for the rest of the presentation. If there are three things that you want to take away from this, the first thing is think of your career as a product, and you are the customers and the end user of these products. It need to be PM. It need you to think about the portfolio of skills that you can have in order to do well as a PM, and how you grow and expand those skill set over time. The second bullet point is if you think about different product manager roles, when you look at different jobs descriptions, it just feel like each of the company, each of the team, each of the organization just having such difference in terms of description of the PM roles they're recruiting for. But I would suggest a framework to break that down, each of the PM into two parts. One is the foundation skill set, and the second is more functional skill set. And each PM role typically consists of the foundation plus one or some of the functional skill set in order to land your first PM role. And the third takeaway that I have is I cannot stress this enough, which has worked really well for me and many other people as well, is always have mentors throughout your journey to understand, to make the transition in your first PM job and grow your career as a PM. And these are different mentors over time that could really help guide you through the different steps of the way. So highly recommend that as well. Let's get to the first point. So why would you need a PM career roadmap, right? So the way that I think about this is you can think of your PM career as a startup. Before you launch anything, you need to understand the product market fit, different requirements, what PM does, and what type of PMs out there. Then the next step is for you to identify the skill gaps that you have versus the requirement for the role that you want to get into. and start working to build some of those skills, to address the gaps. And then there's also the transition step where you interview, network, and also um, uh, do different activities in order to get to your first PM role. So I call the first PM role is the MVP or the MLP version of the PM there that you have. And after you land on that first role, I think it's about, it's similar to a startup which has found the right product market fit, that has kind of survived all the different failure steps. And then you can evolve to add more skills, develop yourself to become a senior PM, PM leaders, and beyond that as well. So the full process I call 0 to 1 is really to find that product market fit so that you can derive the right set of skills and market and sell yourself in order to land the first MVP role as a PM. So let's look into what does the MVP or MLP PM skill sets look like? As I mentioned, each of the PM roles, when you read job description, it feels like each role is so different. How can this be a PM role versus another job description that you read? And what are common things and what are unique things to them? So the way that I like to break this down is to think of PMing as a life cycle. So as a PM, you probably do all of these things. So first of all, you need to understand who your customers are, identify the problems they have, work with different teams to brainstorm potential solutions. Then you need to kind of evaluate and size the potential opportunities, why it makes sense for your team or your company to tackle the problems, as well as come up with the right metrics to measure your success, to measure how you would uh, be successful or fail in a certain stage of the project itself. And then you're also responsible for bringing along the team to execute and launch the products, as well as grow that to a particular vision. And along this way, there may be some set of functional skills depending on the products that you have that you need to build or grow, whether it's technical skills or skills on marketing, on modeling or AI ML or UI UX. So that's kind of the life cycle of how you work to understand problem to launching products and the skills you need. So if you think of it that way, you can break down any particular PM role into a set of foundational skills. And the foundational skills here have three main components: product sense, analytical framework, and execution. And then later on top of that is functional skills that could define a particular PM role. For example, if you're a PM for AWS and working on cloud infrastructure, they may want you to have some more technical understanding of the cloud space or have some sort of experience building a product or working on a product in a similar space. If you're a marketer who have run a lot of experimentations and do a lot of A/B testing, for example, you may be, people may be looking for that in a growth PM kind of role where be able to run experiments and identify and grow. I think is important. There could also be roles that are very UI UX heavy, focusing on the user experience. So if you are a designer, for example, very strong with the sense of customer flow, that could be a particular PM role that would be a good fit as well. And then there could be also people who have strong quantitative or financial skills, could be fit for like a pricing PM role, or people with strong analytics and AI ML knowledge may be a good fit for PM role related to AI and ML as well. So, that's the kind of the landscape that what is shared among all the different PM roles is that foundation piece. You need to understand your customers to articulate why it's important and how to measure the success of your team, as well as working across team to bring the product to the finish line and launch and iterate over time. So with that, I think, as I mentioned here, how you can break down the foundation PM skills is into three buckets: product sense, analytical framework, and execution. And as you think about how you should prepare for PM career, I think these three are the most fundamental and important foundation for landing the first PM role, both in terms of building the skill sets and the framework for you to think about and show that, articulate that in your resume, and also in your interviews. I think a lot of companies, Facebook, Google, and others really look for these skills, not just on resume, but how you demonstrate that during the interview process. So if you can really purposefully practice these skills and develop them to a more complex level over time, that can really help you, prepare for that transition well. And as I mentioned, the product sense here is be able to identify users, then understand what problems they have, really articulate that in more deeply sense, as well as and brainstorm with the teams to potential solutions. Analytical here is not just doing the math, but be able to define what are the different way to quantify the opportunities, as well as why is it something that you should prioritize for the teams to work on, and what is the grand vision, and what is the total impact that you can drive, whether that's revenue for a company or some sort of large user base, like millions or billions of users you could be driving based on the product that you have. And then along the way, defining what metrics that you should be looking at to evaluate your success. Execution here also is about the ability to collaborate with different teams, really talking on the same language with different teams in different ways, so that it really tailored to the understanding, get the alignment on board, and be able to really clarify and bring alignment with stakeholders, both in the company as well as any other process that you run into. So you may ask, okay, so this very hypothetical way, how do I get concrete example into building these skills? So that's where I want to share, different examples from both simple to more complex, and you can get a lot more complex as well to practice and building these foundational skills, even though you may not yet be in that your first PM role, right? So the first example that I have here is simply writing a blog. So let's say you want to start building, how should you build some of the core foundation PM skills, and you don't have time for all resources to do anything fancy. So let's say you start with a blog. Then the first question from the product sense perspective you want to ask yourself is, who am I serving? What needs do they have? And what are the different options out there? Why do I even need to write these blogs? And your example here I gave are, maybe you think about college students as your customers, about PM the careers and how to land the first jobs. And what are the different problems they have? One, they don't understand what skills are needed the day-to-day of the PM role. How their current skills at school can have translate into to the job, as well as what are the gaps that they may have, and what to do in order to address those gaps, right? So maybe that would be the block that you have, and you could see something that's not being addressed properly, like building the skill gaps for college students, and emphasizing that by synthesizing different insights and articles from or interviews with product leaders. So maybe that's the product sense skills that you develop. But you don't just sit down and write a blog. You think through who your customers are, what their needs are, and you may probably interview and talk to other students who may be interested in, really understand their pain points. And I think that itself is a practice of the product sense. It gives you a lot of aha moment when the first few times you do it. It helps you understand how to talk to customers, how to articulate their pain points, and how to go from there to potential ideas to serve as well. And then the analytical piece here is really like how many of these people are you serving, and understanding, how, for example, in this particular case, right? How do you check the success of your blog? So, for example, you may be thinking of a large set of public universities. So It could be that you're serving hundreds of people who might be interested in reading about this, right? So understanding both the size of the opportunity, like who would be your target customers, and is a good starting point. And then understanding how many of those have you been able to attract to read your blogs, to engage with your blog, kind of tracking some of the success metrics there, and then understanding how you can get to the rest of them. I think those are very purposeful practice of the analytical sense. How to even understand how to do some of the math or estimate to understand the market size of people you're serving. Those are great exercise, right? You have to draw assumptions and then have to validate them. And actually, the next step is then execution. How do you get your blogs to be discovered and read by other people? Either that's an email campaign, whether going to different school clubs or school newsletters to reach its customers and engage with your readers. And then for people who have read your blogs, how do you keep them coming back and reading again? Are you collecting their emails? Are you providing additional values for them? So all that, this is a very simple example that anyone can really do. But actually, the how you do it really helps shape some of the PM skills that you can build in terms of the thinking this way and build the block in a very product focused and PM focused way. So that's like a simple example, right? And going to a more complex example, that's is how you can potentially, complexity of skills is how you can potentially bridge the gap between where you are and what the first PM role may require. So let's talk about the second example. Let's say you decide to launch an app as a side project, right? So not everyone have the resource and time to do this. But if you do this, how do you develop the sense of the core foundation of skills that you have there? So in this example, launching an app, you need to similarly understand who your customers are. Um, and because the app is much more time consuming and expensive, maybe you need to think more carefully and make sure that this address a broader set of needs, not just the local community. And also an app requires people to download, so the adoption is also harder than a blog that people can click a link on. So it needs a lot more thoughtful things going in here. So maybe in the product space, you're thinking about beyond the college students, you're thinking about job seekers in general as well, and understanding what are some of the problems that they have. So, you know, as you talk to some of these potential customers, whether that's college students or people who already have jobs and are trying to transition to a job, maybe you would find out some common themes that, okay, people can read blogs, can understand, at a high level, at the theoretical level, what skills are required in a PM, but they actually don't really see how that works in a real life setting. So maybe the product that you end up building is kind of a simulation of a PM role where you have the users have to make some decisions or understand the complexity of what you have to do in terms of product decision, then really help articulate the actual daily life of the PM. So that could be the value prop that you have with this app, and it could be serving to this particular population. And then similarly, the analytical size is like, why does that matter? How many people would find this valuable? How many people have this pain points? So you probably would need to do some sort of interviewing, surveying to target these customers and articulate the pain points and understand, okay, how many of these people have these problems, and by building these products, what is the opportunity that I have to engage with these customers? Could be thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, but being able to think through this and develop additional skills such as customer interviewing or doing a survey to uncover all these hidden needs. I think those are very important skill set as part of the analytical and product sense exercise here. And then, with building an app, there is more than those people who visit, right? You probably want to think about all the different success metrics throughout the life cycle of an app, like how many people download an app, sign up for an account, active users, and all that as well. So, if you think about from the first example to a second example, I think there's a lot more complexity that goes into, building the product, tracking the different metrics of the product, as well um, as the different practices and skills that you can have in order to come up with the numbers. For example, simply this, how do I even get the data for an app? Like what app do I build, iOS or Android or both? All that questions are very realistic question that PM face. The fact that you on the side project can come up with these problems and have the ability to solve them as a side project really have you hone up those skills and give you those extra extra angles later on for your transition to PM. So, and then the third one is execution, which I think compared to the first one is also a lot more complex. You have to think about who you work with, whether it's UI, UX, to build the app, launch the app, engineers or coding yourself. How you run social media to get attentions to your app potentially. How do you target new users and all that stuff as well. So in the execution side, the second to the first to the second example, there's also a very different level of complexity that you're dealing with. So I think, if you think about the framework and how to expand the complexity of this dimension in the three skills, that's kind of how you gradually be able to get those relevant skills to build up your PM foundations over time. So we talk about foundation skills and how it is so important to develop some of that, whether whether you're in college or whether you are at the job right now, and being really purposeful about how and what you do to learn those skills. I think there's one more thing that I want to talk about is also demonstrating those skills in your resume or in your conversation with recruiters. I think as you build those foundation skills, you also have a concrete PM framework that you can frame your resume, for example. If you, let's say you launch that app that help people with simulated exercise for PMing decisions, and you have like hundreds of thousands of users, for example, right? Then what you can put on there are different challenges that you have, the problems that you solve for those customers, different challenges that you have to launch the product, and then the size of the product itself and why it was so hard. There are so many different ways to, depending on your passion, and you can work on problems that are more intuitive and simple without a lot of solutions out there. You can work on some new technology that are cool, maybe not as not a lot of customers per se, but the complexity of the problem is challenging. Those are things at different angles that, depending on your strengths and your interests, I think could be very valuable. So I would suggest that you think about maybe some of the things you're passionate about, start to work on some of the potential either side projects or join people on the side project to learn and develop these skills in a very purposeful way. Now let's talk about the fun part. So what are different paths to land the first MVP or MLP role? So here's where you are able to have enough skills to land your first gig. So I would say there are two main paths that I've seen in people that I have worked with or mentor. One is the direct to PM transition, and the second is the transition from your current role to the tech, the rest similar role in the tech industry, and then from there can navigate to become a PM within that tech company. The third point that I have on there is the importance of mentors, which I'll talk about as well. So let's talk about the first path, direct to PM role. So I think as you probably know, there are different associate PM programs from Facebook, Google, Salesforce. A lot of companies now are developing associate PM programs. And I think those are the programs that really emphasize on the foundational skills. You may or may not have some strong functional skills yet, but that's not as important. I think they want to see on your profile how you shine in the product sense, analytical and foundation and execution skills. And be able to articulate that well on your resume as well as in your interview. So the way, as I share some of the different ways that you can develop those skills, even though you don't work in the tech industry, it definitely takes a lot of dedication and time and investment in order to do that well. But that would help you kind of bring both the right skills to the table, but also articulate the how relevant you are when you apply to this program. The second one, I think, is kind of more obvious, but Bill will join a startup and play the PM roles there. Obviously not everyone can afford this route. Everyone has different needs and priorities. But in a startup world where, depending on the stage of the startup, of course, there'd be need for kind of multitasking kind of roles, and that's really where you can get a lot of flexibility to define and own the different areas within the startup itself. And you can really work yourself up to be building your PM skill sets in the product startup environment. And when you work in the PM for the startups, I think then you also become pretty valuable for a lot of the different tech companies who really value people who can wear multiple hats, be scrappy to get things launched, and that's another the path that you can go as well. I think at Facebook and Amazon, I've seen a lot of different PMs who come from startups and have worked there in different kind of products and have really built up those skills. So I think that's totally possible there. The other interesting direct path to PM could be leveraging your strong functional skills in order to land a PM role in a specific area. So as I mentioned, for example, if you are a developer who are really interested in PM and you are specifically strong in, let's say, a cloud industry, then you already have some of the strong functional skills for, let's say, an AWS PM at Amazon. What you need to is to also raise the bar in the foundational skills, but you have like one of the most important requirements for that particular role. So your transition there maybe as you grow your PM skills, to apply directly or network with the people in those space to understand like what else are you missing, like how do you address those gaps in order to round up like the PM foundation skills in that space itself. Or let's say if you are very strong in analytics in AI and ML, and there are teams who are looking for PMs in the AI and ML space, that could be an area that you also can already have strong foundation and can build up some of strong functional skills, and you just build up the right foundation to be the good fit for the PM there. And similarly, if you have already worked in marketing, run a lot of experimentation, A/B testing, you can get closer to the product side, work more closely with your product teams in engineering, and ramp up some of other foundational skills that you have. Take on a lot of different communications to stakeholders, help kind of be part of that roadmap discussion or brainstorming to build the vision for your products. And those are things that could also, when people look at your resume, you'll be done a lot of the, let's say, growth PM kind of work, and you are purposefully building up your foundation by doing more work in your current role. That can also help you get closer to the first PM role. Other paths, I think, depending on resource and your commitment, they still require a lot of work, but the beauty of this is to give you time and actual examples and projects that you can work on concretely, give you the right network to build. So these are MBAs and different certificate programs. Though they are by no means guaranteeing you a direct path to PM, but if you don't have the time or don't have a clear passion or things that you want to try and build, they can give you resources, mentorship, and concrete projects to build some of those foundational skills. And along with that is a broad network of people who have done this, who have gone through the process, who can really help be your mentors and guide you through the project. So those, I think, are very doable. Obviously, direct to PM is more difficult because most most companies or teams probably likely look for someone who have some sort of PM experience. But if you've never PM before, then your best chance there is to really build them up and show them in different ways, whether it is through extension of your current work environment or side projects. Now, the second transition, I think, is another pretty interesting one that I've seen a lot of my friends and colleagues took as well, which is going to be for sure taking, it's not an easy path, but example could be, you are working in a very functional aspect of your company, which is not a tech company, let's say, whether you're in finance or marketing or you're a developer. The first step there, then you can try to carry over and do a similar work in the tech setting. That means that if you're a marketer, you can be applying for a product marketing role or marketing role in general in a tech firm like Amazon, Facebook, or Google. What would be different is that now you have a chance to purposefully work on marketing for tech product. You also likely will have a chance to work with different cross-functional teams within that product, as well as the product manager in that product. So that is really your chance to, one, understand the foundation a little bit better, how to apply to your product, who your customers are, what are their problems, why are you doing what you're doing, how you're sizing the opportunity and the different communication that PM has in the particular tech company that you have. So it gives you many things. One is very concrete example of what does that look like to PM in your product that you'll be supporting, let's say as a marketing or finance or developer, right? And two, it gives you access to a pool of potential mentors. So within all the different tech companies, there are people who are open to mentoring people who want to transition to a PM role. And there's also access to a PM of your team that you work on directly as well. So that's really where you can get the most realistic gap analysis of where you are, what are the different things you need to develop in order to qualify as a PM in a respective company. Now, the next role, the next step, whether, if that all works out, you could become a PM of that company after you've done like the functional role there. And the tips there is to find the PM role that look for the skills that you have, the background that you have, and can still afford you kind of that time to continue refining and learning the PM roles. And once you're in the inside, I think it's opened a lot of doors that you don't have from the outside. So taking a functional role in a tech company is actually a pretty interesting path that can open different doors. It's probably going to be taking time as well, because once you join a new company, you probably take, I don't know, a year or two at least to settle down to do a good job. Obviously, you have to prove yourself and earn trust with others before you transition. But if you do that, it really helps you make that transition much more easily. And then other option is, even though, let's say you are now a finance or marketing or developer job in the tech company space, you can also bring that as part of your resume and articulate the project related to product management, and then apply to a PM role in other companies as well. So they, first of all, they value your experience within the big tech firm. And if you have chance to work more deeply with products, even though you're not officially titled a product manager, I think there are a lot of values that you can bring from the way that you think, you deal with problems in different perspectives. So if you can demonstrate that and apply to a PM role outside of that tech company, that's also would open a lot of doors. I think it's really about making all those different earning all those different skill set to the practical work experience and demonstrating that in both your resume and during your interviews. So that's kind of the transition. And I think, as I mentioned, to both of these steps, it's very crucial to have mentors throughout each of these steps. One is, throughout your understanding of the PM requirement and your skill gap, maybe it's important to be able to find mentors who have gone through that process, who have pointed you to the do's and don'ts, or like how to think about building your skill set there, whether it's side project or whatnot, and how much is good enough, how and how, really point you to the right path. And as you evolve as well, they can give you feedback like, oh, I've seen you improve in this area and you very purposefully work on this. How about other things? And depending on, like, it can also help talk with you about their experience or working in the current role, and to help articulate some of the ambiguity when you research the roles itself. So, how to do this, how to find these mentors, I think it's probably definitely a trial and error. I think what I've found with the PM communities is that people in general have been pretty open to supporting and doing mentorship. But I think you have to be very purposeful, very driven. You don't rely on them to get you to where you are. You actually have to drive the conversation. And the cadence itself could be monthly, bi-monthly, or quarterly, depending on their availability and what you want to make out of it. But make every conversation count. Like, have clear agenda, have clear guidance that you need from them. Because what's the most satisfying for a mentor is when you can provide valuable feedback to someone and they can make concrete improvements or land the next step. And reaching out, cold calling on LinkedIn, tapping in your alumni network, or networking with PMs in your current companies. Those are all different sources of mentors that you can potentially exploit. But you have to be very resilient in finding this as well. And then, as you found those mentors, they can be a network to help in the future potentially connect you with the right roles. I think it may not be best to start with like, hey, I'm looking for a job. Here's my resume. Can you mentor me? That may not be the most natural way to engage the mentor. I think if you come with the desire and intention to improve and build skill sets and understand the gaps a little bit better and how to get there, that can really be a good starter for a conversation that you can when you mention mentorship with someone. And as I also said, you may need different type of mentors, maybe in the exploration phase to understand really what PMs are. You may need someone who have gone through that or a bit more just to gather information. You may need a different kind of PMs, mentors for like preparing for interviews or like preparing the resume, where the passion is that, and that's the gap that you have. And then you may need a different PM mentors for when you land your first job as a PM and need to do well in the respective company. And it's totally fine after each mentorship where you have found that you have really learned the most from the PMs, and you can proactively tell them as well, like, hey, I think when we met, I really looked for X, Y, and Z help from you. Now I feel like I've really got that. Really appreciate that. I'd love to keep in touch and keep you informed about progress, but I feel like I should give you back the time now that been able to make amazing progress thanks to your help. So those are very good things as well. Keep in touch, but you don't have to have meetings or time with them once you're already we're able to. I think on both sides we're able to make the most out of the mentorship. And last and not least, I just have some kind of pathing advice for people who have navigated to the 0 to 1 and now is endeavoring on the first PM roles. What are some of the key kind of must do in the beginning just to help establish you to the right path? So one is really, as PM, learn your products and learn your users and the backgrounds and context about how the product was built and all that good stuff. I think I cannot stress this enough. Be the super user for your products. Stay close to your users. Read the reviews or conduct interviews and find way to be in touch with them in a frequent basis, not just through data, but also through other means of communication that is more qualitative as well. The second part, as you go to a new company or role, is understand the organization, stakeholders, what are the pain points that they have, and really see how you can have add values in that context. At both Amazon and Facebook, I think when I first had my one-on-one with different stakeholders, one of the frequent question I ask them is, what are the current pain points you have with my team or with with product in general, and what do you think I could help with realistically? And that really opened up a lot of different things that you can add values for that without asking you may not even know. So remember, as PM, your stakeholder is also your customer per se. So finding a way to work well with them and understanding the pain point is also as important as serving your end customers, especially to get things done. The third point, I think we talk about build a network of mentor support. A lot of the companies have a more formal mentorship program, but you can also ask your manager to help find mentors who have worked in the organization or in kind of the broader umbrella teams, and can help share with you some of the best practices on how to PM, how to communicate, all the different pitfalls, and you can share and learn different projects that you have. So have some guidance for how to address and navigate them as well. The fourth point is, each company and teams communicate very differently. So get documents, emails, understand the style and the material that going in there, so that you can really be able to communicate in the language, in the way that the company or organization is doing that actively right now. I think for Amazon and Facebook, I've seen, a very different style of communication, but even understanding that really helps me adapt a little bit more quickly to the rhythm. And then as you on board, define clearly with your manager your success criteria for the first 30 days, 3 months, and 6 months. Have that in writing if possible. But that really help you set the expectation from your manager, align that with how you're performing, so that there's no ambiguity as part of this. As you're a new PM, you would feel like, oh my God, there are hundreds, thousands of things to do. What am I even doing? But defining the success criteria with your manager really help you prioritize what are the most important things that you should focus on. And then there are other things that may seem important at that point, but if it's not as part of your key success criteria, maybe it's time to do them later. All right. And last and not least, I think it's also very important to continue to keep track of your career. So have a separate meeting with your manager for career trajectory, talk about skill sets, what the project you're currently working on, what are the skills that you want to be building, and how you can map some of that project to the skill set you want to develop, as well as what other projects that you can potentially take on in order to address the new skills you want to learn, and keep iterating that throughout your career as well. So I'd like to end here, and thank you very much for the time to spend listening to this webinar. Thank you, Product School, for hosting this very meaningful and valuable time to share with the community as well. I really hope everyone the best of luck in your navigation to the first MVP PM role, and I'm sure that if you have the right framework and diligently and resiliently work on that with the right support of mentorship, you will get there. Thank you.